Alright, this is kind of like a video essay. We're going to take a few minutes to explore Iran's cultural shifts as reflected in Iranian films. We're going to start with a movie from 1969 called The Cow. This movie is about a middle-aged Iranian man in the countryside named Hassan, whose best friend is a cow, and is the only cow in their village. And he leaves the village for a while, and while he's gone, his friends go to check on the cow, and they find that it's dead. So they bury it, and then when he gets back, they tell him it ran away, and then he goes insane, and then he thinks he is the cow, and nobody, including his wife, can help him recover. Now, the film can actually tell us a lot about rural Iranian culture at the time. Not that people thought they were cows, because they didn't. It does show how much the community values their livestock, as well as the amount of care that they show toward each other. The men in the movie wear taqiyas, which are prayer caps, and the women wear hijabs, so it's both traditional Muslim clothing. The film is in a traditional rural setting in Iran, which is exactly why it was temporarily banned from viewing, because while many people could identify with this film, the image that the second Shah of Iran wanted them to relate to and conform to was one of a more modern, westernized, and industrialized society, similar to American culture. So despite being banned, the film was smuggled out of Iran and shown at the Venice Film Festival, where it won an award, so much to the Shah's dismay, the image of Iran that he had wanted to repress was reinforced by the movie into the minds of audiences abroad. What he would have preferred them to see would have probably looked more like this. Popular movies in Iran before the Islamic Revolution mostly took place in cities and centered around family conflict, crime, and drama, just like they did in the US and Britain. Iranian movies, however, seem to have been less individualistic than American movies at the time. Like while in America you had spaghetti westerns focusing on a single character's adventures, Iranian movie characters seem to have a slightly different set of motivations at times, focusing on more of the honor and well-being of their families, which is a reflection of their culture. And this was really a subtle difference, and likely one that the writers didn't know that they were making. For example, in the 1969 film Kaysar, a man named Kaysar hunts down the man who killed his brother and caused his sister's death. It's kind of like a revenge fantasy, like a Tarantino movie, but in Farsi. Another difference is that the motivation is revenge on behalf of his family, rather than a more individualistic matter like you'd see in a lot of Western films. Action movies weren't the only kind of film produced in Iran at this time, though. The Iranian poet and feminist Farrokh Rakhzad, for example, wrote and directed this popular 1962 film, The House is Black, about an Iranian leper colony. This film was made to humanize people with leprosy and advocate for their fair treatment, and it reflects a cultural movement toward tolerance. The film is also filled with poetry, which reflects Iran's rich cultural history of poetry as storytelling. You'll notice if you research Iranian intellectuals that many dabbled to some extent in poetry. While there were still religious themes in Iranian films at this time, there was also different restrictions upon what you could show on screen. While The Cow received scrutiny for depicting traditional aspects of Iranian culture regarded as old-fashioned, you could portray violence or sexuality on screen to a comparatively liberal extent. Here's some Iranian commercials from the 1970s just to prove my point. While all this was acceptable, you could not promote traditional or highly religious values, nor could you promote communist or anti-government ideas. The Shah was promoting westernization in a way that eventually made many Iranians feel their culture and freedom were being taken from them and replaced with a manufactured idea of freedom that was artificially imposed on them, and then eventually, the Shah's censorship piled onto a huge amount of grievances and tension that reached their peak really when his law enforcement began shooting at protesters and torturing political dissidents, leading to the revolution in 1979. After the revolution, to the dismay of many who had participated in overthrowing the Shah, the Islamic leader Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, and we see a huge influx of restrictions. Everyone in Iran has had to follow these religious laws, which reflects on their films in certain ways. While pre-revolution Iranian films underrepresented a lot of people on the countryside and who were more traditional and religious, post-revolution films have left out a lot of the more socially progressive people of Iran, and we can see how their views have been suppressed by the lack of openly progressive values shown in films. You can see in current Iranian films that women are not permitted to sing or dance on screen, and they have to wear hijabs all the time, on screen, and you might want to go ahead and label all these films as being like anti-feminist and pro-government or something, since they do comply with these oppressive rules, but that wouldn't be true at all. These films themselves have to follow restrictions, but you'll notice nowadays that some filmmakers have found ways to humanize women and work with these rules in ways that critique the systems that they have to exist under. For example, I'm just, using feminism as an example. Many modern Iranian films have female leads, where pre-revolution films almost never did, and although the female characters don't have as much freedom as male characters, that's just an accurate reflection of the society that they live in. Most of the movies that take place in Iran that do have themes that oppose the government's views, such as The Day I Became a Woman and the film adaptation of Persepolis, have had to be released and shown outside of Iran, but some movies that were released in Iran have been able to reflect these suppressed cultural undertones in a subtle enough way to fly under the radar. In the movie Red Nail Polish, for example, a 16-year-old girl named Akram is forced to care for her mother and younger siblings following the death of her abusive and drug-addicted father. She also wears nail polish, which is an act of self-expression that Iranian women have been jailed for in the past. The very plot of the film highlights the struggle many Iranian women have to face and serves as an act of resistance simply by telling their story. This shows us that although Iran's current government is repressive and violates the human rights of the people, it's not reflective of the people themselves. Social issues in Iran are often painted to be a conflict between the religious and secular values, but what it actually seems to be is a conflict between those who want religion to influence the government and those who don't. While some women, for example, want to continue wearing hijabs in public as a reflection of their personal values, many don't support the law that makes doing so mandatory. Recent protests in Iran have involved women who oppose this law waving their hijabs on the end of a stick, and we even saw women who did wear hijabs waving an additional one to show support and solidarity for those who didn't want to have to. Many of these women were arrested. Additionally, while many people in the West view all Iranians as homophobic due to the fact that so many gay and lesbian Iranians have been publicly executed, that generalization is exactly what their theocratic government wants outsiders to make. This ignores all of the Iranians who oppose that viewpoint, which includes Iran's biggest pop star, Gugush, who many regard as a national icon. Gugush released a music video in 2014 for her song Behesht, depicting a lesbian relationship as an act of solidarity for the Iranian LGBT community, as well as those communities in countries with similar rights violations and restrictions. Our purpose in making this video was to show in the case of Iran that people are not the same as the government that they live under, and also to educate people about Iranian culture and history in an entertaining way through film, because film is a very important industry in Iran. It's the first video essay I know I've ever done, and it's also just for a school project, and it was a school project with Daniel Heffler and Alex Hart. Thank you for watching it. I hope it wasn't inaccurate.